Following the success of the first season, the Warner Brothers network decided to renew Buffy and keep the story going. A few new key writers would join the team, like Martin Oxon and David Fury, who would be pivotal in the show's future. Season 2 of Buffy starts similar to Season 1. A lot of the stories are episodic, however most of them are far more well done if I recall correctly. Although the season does have its fair share of bad episodes, don't get me wrong, but they're fairly rare. The show was also extended in episodes, the first season only having 12. Now every season after has 22, so we have a lot to cover here, and I'm interested to watch this again after viewing the first season. This is an episodic analysis of Season 2 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Joss Whedon's penned opening episode is a step in the right direction. Buffy has been away for the summer, spending it in LA with her dad. She returns as the school year begins, however she seems rather off. First, she acts weirdly around Giles and the others, including an odd interaction with Angel, who just shows up at her window in the middle of the night, as you do. When Angel tries to make things right the following night, Buffy aims to make him jealous by having a very heated dance with Xander. Even Cordelia has a go at Buffy for acting horrible, however, that doesn't end well for Cordelia, who gets kidnapped behind Buffy's back. Buffy finds the Master's grave because for some reason Giles thought burying the Master would end well, and he's gone, the grave is empty. It turns out this group of vampires led by the Anointed One have dug him up and wanted to resurrect him using the bones. Well, it's convenient those bones stuck around then. Willow theories that Buffy is possessed, which is why she's acting off, although their conversation doesn't get very far with Buffy intervening, as does Principal Snyder.
There's some things I can just smell. It's like a sixth sense.
Well, actually, that would be one of the 5.
If there's one dynamic I think is underappreciated in this show, it's Giles and Snyder. They're such a strange duo that I can't quite figure out why Snyder keeps talking to Giles even though they clearly don't agree on anything, or have much in common at all. I'd say we should have gotten more of them together, but I think we got plenty in the time that Buffy remains in high school. While Buffy and the gang work out who could have stolen the Master's remains, a rock comes through the window with Cordelia's watch attached, threatening to kill her if Buffy doesn't come.
Come to the bronze before it opens, or we make her a meal.
They're gonna cook her dinner?
Despite the fact it's an obvious trap, Buffy goes against what the gang say and heads out. She runs into Angel, and the two confront the vampire inside the bronze, revealing that the trap wasn't for them, it was actually for Willow, Xander, and Giles. And Giles figures this out too, right as it's about to happen. It's to resurrect the Master. They need 4 people who were the closest to him when he died, i.e. the people who were in the library at the time. Buffy comes back too late and finds a beat-up Xander who lets her know about everything, warning her that if Willow is hurt, it could possibly mean the end of their friendship. While the ritual gets underway, Buffy arrives, saves the day, crushes the Master Bones with a sledgehammer, and everything's hunky-dory. See, Buffy wasn't actually possessed, she was just acting like that for some reason. To be honest, I'm not sure why, and I just watched the episode. Maybe she thought she had to be more serious than before, and it just didn't work. Aside from that, the writing is great, and there's a ton of very nice scenes and back and forths between characters. There's a scene where Snyder is explaining to Giles just exactly why he doesn't like teenagers and the awkward conversations they have with each other and the flirting and stuff. Meanwhile, in the background, Giles is relaying and having the same conversation as an adult with Jenny as Snyder is saying it.
I might as well be talking to myself.
This episode is good, if you can excuse the lack of a solid explanation for everything. Just chalk it up to teenagers. Writer Ty King spent only 1 season working on the show, writing a total of 2 episodes. 2 episodes that couldn't be further apart in terms of consistency. This first episode is a return to formula for the series, as a throwaway character named Chris is reeling from the death of his brother Daryl the year before. Him and his friend Eric decided to resurrect Daryl and now plan on making him a girlfriend. However, the bodies they had used were killed in a car crash. But none of the heads please Daryl, but Cordelia's does. Buffy ends up rescuing Cordelia in the nick of time, and Daryl burns with the headless body of his girlfriend. The relationships between some of the characters are beginning to develop more, as Angel still feels jealous after Buffy's dance with Xander in the previous episode, and Giles finally admits to himself that he has feelings for Jenny, who's now officially a recurring character in the series. As peculiar as this episode may be, there's no doubt that it's really clumsily made, like it was half-hearted by the cast and crew. A lot of the acting, especially between the Buffy and Angel scenes, begin to get a bit questionable, although it's strange because the two actors have good chemistry at the same time. A lot of Buffy's shooting days were incredibly long, so I wouldn't be surprised if these scenes were shot towards the end of the day. I mean, look at this, I'm watching the original 4x3 version and there's a lighting rig off to the side. It's not even subtle, it's blinding.
You would have been 19 next week.
That's funny because Daryl looks like he's nearing 30. The casting's even taken a hit here. And the story is so far-fetched, even for early Buffy, that I find myself still trying to figure out exactly how I feel about it. It's almost like a B-movie rather than an episode of Buffy. Joss Whedon and David Greenwalt collaborated to bring this story and its new characters to life, which they definitely succeed in doing. This is the episode that introduces fan favourite Spike as the new villain for most of Season 2, and his completely insane girlfriend Drusilla. They move to the Hellmouth looking for some action and accept the task of taking out the Slayer for the Anointed One. Buffy meanwhile is on the risk of expulsion and is tasked with arranging the decorations for parent-teacher night. Giles figures out that the coming Saturday will be the night of St. Vitus, a deeply important night for vampires, which is why it's only ever mentioned in this episode and never brought up again. Buffy is dancing at the bronze when Spike appears, attempting to lure her outside, where he warns her that on the night of St. Vitus, he will hunt her down. While the principal tells Joyce about Buffy's less than stellar time at high school, Spike attacks, completely catching Buffy off guard. After making sure everyone's safe, Buffy crawls in the ceiling to reach the library. Xander is sent off to find Angel, which doesn't make much sense considering that if anyone leaves, they're attacked and eaten, but Xander isn't? Anyway, Angel hatches a plan to trick Spike, who he has a long history with, as evident when it doesn't work, and Spike rants about how Angel was his sire. Funny thing is, this would later be retconned and Drusilla would be Spike's sire, but it's funny to see an alternate timeline almost take place here. Buffy is almost taken down by Spike, but Joyce comes to save the day.
You want the usual story? Gang-related, PCP?
What you have in mind, the truth?
Right.
Now this is a great line. All of a sudden, Principal Snyder is brought into question about just how much he actually knows and is pretending he doesn't. We'll find out more later, but it's mostly just speculation about whether he actually knows Buffy is the Slayer or not. Spike attempts to make things right with the Anointed One, but gives up and burns him to a crisp in the sunlight, officially becoming the big bad. This is a good episode, I'll give it that. The scene where Spike sees Buffy for the first time is a highlight. The song playing is actually quite prophetic to how the character's relationship would develop. Definitely unintentional. But it's quite scary how appropriate the lyrics to the song Stupid Thing are to them. One of the greatest things they did for the season was promoting Angel to a main character rather than a guest, which he was for Season 1. It allows this character with fantastic backstory and a great knowledge of the lore to become more integral to the cast itself. That being said, here's the only episode in the season where he doesn't even appear. The season goes through a bit of a strange point over the next few episodes, a few odd stories as we continue on. An Incan mummy is risen from her tomb and some kid destroys a seal that was keeping her there. She poses as a human being, sucking the life out of people to continue her disguise. Buffy, who had agreed to take a foreign exchange student for a few weeks, ends up with the girl. Xander falls head over heels for her, and Willow can't stand her for the same reason. Eventually she can't suck any more life and breaks apart. This is your standard early Buffy episode. It was written by Keenan Rainkemeier, whose last efforts we saw with the Pack. This is her final story for the show, and I prefer this over the Pack by a mile. A few new characters are even introduced here. Oz makes his first appearance, spotting Willow out of the crowd, very romantic. Jonathan appears too, although he isn't named just yet. It's good to see a few more familiar faces begin to pop up as we move forward, during this odd transitional period where the show doesn't fully become what it really wants to until halfway through the season. It's still shedding off that skin. As Willow finally moves on from Xander, this unrequited love arc is concluded and should 100% stop there, right? Well, if only it doesn't make a sudden reappearance next season. But like I mentioned, Angel's missing from this episode, and I believe it's noticeable, although the void is kinda filled by the few new characters. Not the same though. If I've ever seen an episode with David Greenwalt written all over it, it's this one. A group of frat boys are holding a party and Cordelia is invited. As an agreement, she has to bring Buffy with her in order to come. This guy named Tom is also very nice and not like the other guys, seemingly being more respectful, which means he's going to be the villain later on. Buffy is pushed into going by Angel's lack of interest in her.
When you kiss me, I want to die.
You know, that's a very unconvincingly written and delivered line. Anyway, Xander sneaks into the party and gets caught by the frat boys, resulting in humiliation. Meanwhile, Buffy is drugged by, guess who? Tom and his good buddy. They're taken underground where they'll be sacrificed to some sort of demon thing. Buffy stops it with a little help from the rest of the gang and the day is saved. This marks a change in Buffy and Giles' dynamic here, as Buffy actively lies to him about going to the party. Giles is upset, but Willow sticks up for her very well, and everything turns out alright. One thing I've noted is how the villains and challenges that Buffy faces are slowly becoming less and less fictional. Alright, there's a snake demon in the final act, which is Greenwald's trademark, you know, a random demon at the end, but Buffy and Cordelia are drugged. Not by a demon, but by real human beings. I just couldn't see this happening in Season 1. Angel and Buffy finally start to move on in their relationship, as Angel eventually asks Buffy out for coffee at the end of the episode. His passion and adoration for Buffy is shown throughout this story, as when the thought of her being in danger makes him almost immediately angry. It's this admission that finally allows the story to move on from the love triangle romance of Season 1 into the Buffy and Angel romance of Season 2. This is a perfectly fine episode. I just wish it had a slightly better final act. instead of a snake monster. It's Halloween, and a new costume store named Ethan's is selling the town these costumes, which, when using an ancient ritual, causes the wearer to literally become what costume they're dressing up as. Xander is an army soldier, Buffy becomes an 18th century princess, and Willow a ghost. Willow, Cordelia, and Angel have to keep things together since they're the only sane ones. Cordelia reveals she got her costume somewhere else, and that turns Willow and Giles onto Ethan's trail. Giles manages to get the solution out of Ethan just as Spike is about to sink his teeth into Buffy. She scares Spike off and Ethan escapes. This is a great episode. It's really one of the classic installments of the early years of the show. Not only does it give us the return of Spike and establishes the long-held tradition of things being quiet on Halloween for demons and vampires, but it introduces us to Ethan Rayne, one of the most important characters that the show ever had. Now I know, some people who've probably watched the show might not even remember the guy. He only appears in a handful of episodes, usually getting taken out pretty easily at the end of things. However, he provides the audience an introduction to Giles' past. As soon as he sees Ethan Rayne, Giles' demeanour changes instantly. He snaps at Willow to leave quickly and proceeds to beat up Ethan, mostly because he feels like it. We don't find out an awful lot about Giles' past in the show, only bits here and there, which I quite like mostly for the mystery element. Giles has had a really shady past, earning him the nickname Ripper. It's a shady past that we've never even thought about before due to his clean-cut appearance and manner. You'd almost think it was an act, in the way he awkwardly interacts with Jenny Calendar and his disapproving nature towards anything new, just like an uptight British person may appear to a group of American teenagers. This opens so many new doors for Giles' character, but he's not the only character that has new doors open, as both Buffy and Angel are pretty much confirmed to be a thing at this point. Their first date doesn't go too well, but things seem fine by the closing scenes of the episode. This is the only episode to be written by one-episode wonder Carl Ellsworth, who does a pretty good job of keeping the characters in character, even if some of them aren't for a good chunk of the episode. I always forget about this one on rewatches. It's not because it's forgettable by any means. In fact, I'd say it's one of the strongest episodes I've seen of the show so far. But the reason for that isn't its bare plot details, it's what's hidden underneath that. One of Buffy's old classmates from LA arrives in Sunnydale, Ford, claiming to have transferred schools. Buffy is thankful that something new has happened to distract her from the fact that Angel lied to her about having a confrontation with Drusilla the previous night. Through snooping, however, Angel finds that Ford is part of a secret underground group that worships vampires. Ford, meanwhile, makes a deal with Spike to give him Buffy in order to become a vampire. Spike accepts, and while Buffy heads to confront Ford at his club, he lets her know he has cancer, and becoming a vampire is the only way he can live longer than 6 months, and he's more than determined. Buffy gets the better of Spike, who begins his massacre, and she locks him in the club along with Ford. In the ending scene, Buffy stakes the risen Ford, ironically ending his life quicker than if he wasn't turned. I mentioned that it was the hidden elements of this episode that makes it so special, and the first part is the lying aspect. The whole episode centres around the concept of avoiding the truth. It starts with Buffy feeling betrayed by Angel's lie, and then when Ford reveals his painful truth instead of continuing the easy lie of being evil, and it ends with Buffy actively telling Giles to lie to her in order to make her feel better. Joss Whedon's use of subtext is quite genius here. Buffy doesn't really know what she wants to hear. All she wants is the truth at the beginning, frustrated with Angel's lie, but it's Ford's that pushes her in the opposite direction. What at first is seen as a throwaway episode now becomes crucial in understanding Buffy's character and the decisions she makes. Giles' past comes back to haunt him when a demon that he created, along with 4 of his old school friends, decides it's their time to die. All but Giles and Ethan Rayne are killed, and it's safe to say that neither is taking this as a terribly laughing matter. Jenny and Giles' relationship is actually going pretty good until she's knocked out and the demon possesses her, nearly killing Giles. Ethan Rayne tricks Buffy and knocks her out so he can tattoo the mark on her that will make the demon attack her, meanwhile pouring literal acid on his arm so that he can evaporate his own. The demon Jenny shows up, and through quick thinking by Willow, Angel appears and lets the demon take him over, fighting it inside himself. This is one of the coolest scenes in the season, and the special effects actually still hold up very well, believe it or not. Jenny seems a bit timid around Giles after what happens, and it's unclear as yet whether things will ever be the same again. Robidez Hotel and Dean Batali, whose efforts we last saw with the Puppet Show in Season 1, are slowly becoming some of my favourite writers during the show's early years. Not only do they nail the dialogue and feel of the characters, but they're yet to write an absolute stinker of an episode, and as far as I can remember from this point, they don't. The show really finds its groove at this stage, as hit episode after hit episode is coming our way. I always like a good Giles episode. They don't happen very often, but they always provide an interesting look at this character. From this point on, however, it's pretty much left up to the imagination what else happened in Giles' past. They go into it more in the comics, but I don't know, most fans are too busy contemplating whether they actually consider the comics canon or not to really care. I'll probably end up talking about the comics one day, but that's not for an episodic analysis, most likely a one-off if it ever does happen. This two-part story is the first written by Marty Noxon, assisted by Howard Gordon for the first part. Noxon would be a writer throughout the rest of the show and will run into plenty more of our episodes as we continue. Spike hatches a plan to restore Drusilla to her full power, the plan supposedly being written out in the book that was stolen from Giles in Lie to Me. However, it needs to be decoded. Buffy almost stops Dalton, who's the vampire that's helping Spike decode the manuscript, and Spike decides that the Order of Taraka, a group of 3 assassins, would be enough to kill Buffy, allowing them to continue their plan. While on a date with Angel, the first assassin attacks, but with Angel's help, Buffy kills him with the blade of her ice skate. As they console each other, a mysterious girl watches them from afar. There is a great scene after Giles tells Buffy that she won't know who the assassins are until they strike, where Buffy is walking down the school corridor watching everyone carefully, and she eventually snaps at poor Oz. I love that. I love how on edge she is. I like that we see into that and we see inside her head. Angel goes to Willie's bar, looking for information from Willie the Snitch, a human who owns a demon bar, and while Angel's there, the mysterious girl attacks him and locks him in a cage while the sun rises. Buffy is nowhere to be found by the gang, and Xander and Cordelia search her house to find her while Joyce is away for the week. Cordelia answers the door to the strange man, who is actually the second assassin. He's able to shapeshift his body into worms at will, disguised as a door-to-door salesman giving out free samples, so that he'll be invited into the victim's home. Buffy is actually at Angel's apartment where the mysterious girl appears, revealing herself to be a vampire slayer? Yeah, remember when Buffy died last season? Well, even though she was revived after a few minutes, it still counts as her death, and a new slayer was called, whose name is Kendra. Willie finds Angel locked away and hands him over to Spike, who wants to use Angel's blood, being Drusilla's sire, to restore her to full strength. Cordelia and Xander are trapped in the basement trying to flee the second assassin. They argue with each other before...
Moron.
I hate you!
I hate you!
Okay. They escape past him and head to the library, where they get caught up on Kendra's sudden appearance. While Giles bonds with Kendra, much to Buffy's annoyance, Giles recommends that Buffy return to the career week fair that's going on. Unfortunately, that's where the third assassin is, and she attempts to shoot Buffy. She ultimately fails, but does manage to scrape a bullet in poor Oz's arm, who just can't seem to catch a break in his attempt to shield Willow. Buffy attempts to get Angel's location out of Willie, but Kendra refuses to come with her once she does, telling her it's not procedure. Buffy doesn't listen, obviously, and leaves swiftly with Willie, heading for the church where Angel is being kept. It's obviously a trap, with the rest of the assassins and Spike henchmen there waiting. Kendra shows up at the last minute, accompanied by the rest of the gang, and they put an abrupt stop to the ritual. Angel lives, although a lot of strength was given to Drusilla beforehand, so it might not have stopped a lot. Spike is crushed by the organ and is presumed dead. Kendra and Buffy say goodbye, Willow and Oz say hello, and Xander and Cordelia... Also, Spike is very much still alive, with a powerful Drusilla rescuing him from the burnt church. I've always liked these 2 episodes. They provide an interesting look at the contrast between different slayers. Despite the fact that Buffy and Kendra don't really have anything in common and both view slaying in a completely opposite way, they end up being friends by the end. That connection of being the slayer and having a person to share that with is strong. Buffy even has the idea of letting Kendra continue on as the slayer so that she can retire and live her own life. Kendra, despite the fact she doesn't approve of Buffy's methods, still learns something at the end, that slaying is who they are, not a job, which Buffy was struggling with throughout the career fair during the story. This marks the point where Buffy refers to Angel as her boyfriend, and both Xander and Willow each find a relationship. It's also a good way to begin the transition of both Cordelia and Oz later on into the main gang. They're no longer outsiders and only occasionally popping up. As a mid-season finale, this would be a fine set of episodes to take a break on. If only this wasn't the mid-season finale and there was one episode left that had nothing to do with the rest of the season story. Oh! And it had John Ritter in it. The writing duo of Joss Whedon and David Greenwalt brings us perhaps the strangest episode of the show I've seen thus far. I honestly at times throughout watching this one, I can't believe it exists. It's so peculiar. It just begins so normally and descends into madness around the halfway mark. Oh, it's well done. Basically, Joyce starts dating this guy named Ted, and he immediately starts to make an impact in Buffy's life, much to her annoyance. After a day of mini-golf where Ted threatens to slap Buffy, she begins to worry about her and her mother's safety with this man. Everyone else though loves Ted, and doesn't see any issue with him at all. Joyce even accuses Buffy of lying about Ted's violent threats. When Ted snoops in Buffy's personal belongings and finds all her slaying equipment, he threatens to show Joyce. This begins an all-out fight where Ted goes flying down the stairs.
You You killed him.
Buffy kills Ted. This is where the episode spins out of control at times. The next chunk of the story is spent with the police detectives asking questions and Buffy pretty much unknowing if she's going to get charged over Ted's death. That is until Ted reappears almost completely fine. Xander, Willow and Cordelia do some digging and discover that Ted has been around for a very long time with marriage certificates dating back to the 1950s, similar to Teacher's Pet, another Greenwald written episode. The influence he had over everyone was in his cooking. Ted is seen cooking many pizzas and cookies throughout the episode, which everyone but Buffy eats, explaining why she never trusted him. The Buffy and Jealous gang find an address where Xander discovers the dead bodies of his previous wives, and they swiftly leave. Ted comes very close to getting his hands on Joyce, but Buffy saves the day, and he's a robot. Okay. Yeah, turns out Ted was dying and managed to store himself inside a robot with which he tortured his first 4 wives with. Presumably the charges are dropped when this discovery is unveiled, although it's kind of never brought up again, which takes away from the story slightly. Meanwhile, Giles and Jenny make up, and by the end of the episode they're getting quite familiar with each other. Now, I like this episode. However, when I found out that Joss Whedon was behind the writing process, it kind of blew my mind. But I can assure you this was a Greenwald idea that Whedon probably liked the idea of. John Ritter gives a great guest performance as the homicidal robot Ted. The way he slowly loses his own android mind because for the first time he can't control someone over his drugged cooking. This leads to his downfall, and it's almost quite poetic that he tortured women for decades, but eventually it was Buffy, a woman, who tortured him with his lack of control over her. It led to his demise. Cordelia actually helps with the research a lot in this episode, which proves there's a bit more to her than meets the eye. She might act dumb sometimes, but there's a level of intelligence enough to know where to look that Willow didn't. Check this one out again if you wrote it off before. It takes on quite a rollercoaster of emotions, and I think it's a solid mid-season finale, although I probably would have preferred What's My Line still to do that job. I see this one get dog's abuse from fans all the time, and while it's definitely not perfect, it's far from terrible. Martin Oxon wrote this episode with David Greenwald directing, so with his input, you know we're going to get the classic Greenwald twist. The sex ed teacher gives out eggs to couples in the class as a standard parenting exercise. This goes haywire when the eggs actually have demon bugs in them that can control people's minds. Buffy and Xander are the only two not to be affected because Buffy was out patrolling when her egg hatched, and Xander hard-boiled his egg in an attempt to cheat the class. It's Mr. Whitmore, the sex ed teacher, who of course in a Greenwald twist is the villain. On a completely unrelated note, these 2 cowboy vampires are hanging around the Gorch brothers. If you're expecting them to be the next big bad, then prepare to be disappointed as one of them dies to the demon overlord that hatched the eggs. My one gripe with this episode is its severe lack of action and that there's almost none. At the end of the episode, Buffy fights the demon overlord off screen. We just see shots of the characters looking down the hole as she fights it. Where's my final fight? Where's my action? The only punch we see is given by Xander as he's trying to escape the hypnotised Cordelia, which really doesn't help his case as being one of the most overhated characters by many fans. The other cowboy runs away and won't return until next season, and the day is saved. Even though Joyce grounds Buffy, she still has a happy ending with Angel at her window. This episode really doesn't do anything for character development. In fact, I can get away with calling this absolute filler, which I know is an overused term when talking about media of any kind. However, nobody learns any lessons here, nothing new is discovered about the characters, the overarching story doesn't move or go anywhere. Just an easy way to ease us into the second half of the season. And I like Buffy and Angel. A lot of people prefer other romances in the show, but this was just pure chemistry between these two, not just the characters but the actors. When they weren't endlessly squabbling, it's a heavily tolerable romance, and I'm glad it'll last a long time. What's the next episode? Oh, for fuck's sake. In a first for the series, this 2-part story has 2 completely different writers for each episode, with Marty Noxon writing Surprise and Joss Whedon writing and directing Innocence. Spike and Drusilla return for this episode with a now wheelchair-bound Spike collecting wooden boxes for an upcoming party, conveniently as it's Buffy's birthday. Buffy is freaked out by her prophetic dreams of Drusilla appearing and constantly killing Angel that it kinda puts a damper on the birthday celebrations. Jenny is visited by her Uncle Ennius, and it's revealed that she is a distant relative of the gypsies that put the curse on Angel, giving him his soul back 100 years earlier. Jenny was sent to watch over Angel, making sure that he never loses his soul or else the suffering is over. If Angel achieves one moment of true happiness, making him feel almost human, he will lose his soul, and since Angel has been getting rather familiar with Buffy recently, this has caught the attention of the gypsies. Ennius warns Jenny that if she doesn't do something soon, the vicious Angelus will return. At Buffy's surprise party, they discover Dalton smuggling another wooden box, and once they stop him, they find an arm. This is part of a powerful demon named the Judge, who was so powerful that no weapon forged could kill him. An army of men managed to split him into pieces and scatter him around the world to avoid him getting pieced back together. 600 years later, here he is, and it doesn't look good. Jenny edges Angel into taking the box away so that Spike can't finish assembling the Judge, and as Buffy says goodbye at the docks, they're attacked and the box is snatched away. The Judge is reassembled and kills Dalton, beginning to get his strength back. Fun fact, the Judge is actually played by Brian Thompson, who also played the vampire Luke in the first 2 episodes. Buffy has a dream which lets her know of the location of the Judge, unbeknownst to her, that he's already been assembled. She takes Angel on a recon mission where they discover the very much alive Judge, who captures them and comes so close to killing Buffy. However, he fails and Buffy and Angel escape into the sewers and out into the rainy night. They return to Angel's apartment where one thing leads to another and they end up having a good old-fashioned sex session. Once it's over, Angel leaps up and collapses into the alleyway outside. A woman attempts to help him, and what follows is one of the most iconic scenes in the entire series.
You want me to call 911?
No. Pain is gone.
You sure?
Yeah.
The final big bad is revealed. Angelus has returned, and he makes his presence known to Spike and Drew, joining their side. Buffy returns to the library after waking up to an empty bed and reveals that the Judge has been assembled. No one has heard from Angel since last night, and it isn't until Buffy returns to his apartment that she finds him. He humiliates her, referencing their time together the previous night, and then he walks off. Jenny talks to Enyas, who lets her know that Angelus has returned, and Willow catches Xander and Cordelia together, which angers her. Even though they make up, the lights go down and Angelus approaches the two. He attempts to kill Willow, but Jenny is quick to appear and attempt to stop him. Buffy also shows up and Angelus flees, but not before taunting Buffy that he's going to make the entire fight between the two of them be torture for her. Buffy returns home and breaks down completely, crying herself to sleep where she has a dream about Jenny, catching on that she had something to do with all this. She confronts her the next day, and Giles is mortified to hear Jenny's truth. They travel to speak with her uncle, who's dead. Angelus paid him a visit earlier and splattered another taunting message on the wall directed at Buffy. See, the magic that was used by the gypsies to ensoul Angel is lost to the gypsies, which is why they were so concerned with making sure the soul stayed. Xander hatches a plan to steal something from the local army base. You know, every small town has one, and they succeed. As they're preparing at the library, both Buffy and Giles give Jenny the cold shoulder after her lies and she leaves. The Judge takes Drusilla and Angelus with him to do a mass killing at the mall in order to restore the Judge to his full strength. They're stopped by Buffy, who reveals that the item stolen from the army base was a rocket launcher. Yep, 600 years ago no weapon forged could stop him. Doesn't mean something that was forged since then didn't have the ability. They blow him up, and the gang collect his pieces. Buffy, however, goes after Angelus, and they have a good old fight. Angelus makes a very good point that he doesn't believe Buffy can kill him, loving Angel too much to do so. She agrees and kicks him in the balls, which, yeah, that'll do it for now, let me tell you. Giles comforts Buffy as he drives her home, acting as a sort of father figure for her, and she cuddles up on the couch with Joyce, ending this epic. Surprise is a half-decent episode with some pretty good back and forths, but Innocence is brilliant, really thrilling. This is the best episode by far. It was such a smart move to build up this big bad Judge to have him die instantly, and the real big bad is Angel, or Angelus as he's called when evil, to distinguish the two separately. A character who is essentially the romantic interest for a season and a half is now the villain, the main villain, and that's fantastic. That's the difference between a Whedon twist and a Greenwald twist. A Greenwald twist is one you see coming a mile off, whereas a Whedon twist, even if you're expecting it, happens when you least expect it to, catching you completely off guard still. Oz is integrated into the gang, supplying the van that they use to transport the rocket launcher. He has this great conversation with Willow, who wants to kiss him in order to get revenge on Xander and Cordelia. He tells her about how his fantasies about kissing her usually are, and on a rainy night, as an act of jealousy, isn't really one of them. The acting's pretty good aside from Oz's Mark Wahlberg like what?
Do you want to make out with me?
What?
The problem with this being a two-parter is just how plainly obvious it is that Joss Whedon knows exactly what these characters should say and do under any situation. Martine Oxon had just joined the writing team. Surprise is her 4th episode, and while she would eventually understand the characters better, she still does struggle, like the repeated hammering of this joke about British people over explaining things which must be told like 3 times in the same scene. I get it. Giles says more than one word where it isn't needed. Do you have to tell one joke more than once where it isn't needed? It's also sad to see Giles and Jenny have a sort of full breakup here, as it isn't the end of their relationship. However, it does show the commitment that Giles has to Buffy and being her watcher, so much so that he holds that in higher regard than his personal relationships. I mentioned earlier how much I enjoyed Des Hotel and Batali's rating in these first two seasons, and this episode is no different. It's the first episode in what is affectionately referred to by the rating team as the Willow Oz trilogy, with the other two episodes in that trilogy coming a bit later in the show's run. A werewolf is loose in Sunnydale, temporarily taking Buffy's mind off of Angelus, who's still on the prowl, making his name in the town. A werewolf hunter named Kane is hunting the animal, not disturbed by the fact that it's a human, literally aside from 3 nights a month. The gang have to figure out who the werewolf is before Kane kills it, and the prime suspect is Larry, although when Xander confronts him, it turns out he's just gay. It's actually Oz who's been bitten by his little cousin a month earlier, who is also a werewolf. He's been distancing himself from Willow recently after discovering this about himself, but Willow confronts him at the house right as he turns. They end up finding him first, and Willow shoots him with a tranquilizer, and Kane leaves town on Buffy's orders. Really solid episode, all things considered. Kane only appears in this episode, although the actor Jack Conley would go on to have a recurring role in Angel a few years later as a different character. It's a shame because Kane, despite only being in the episode for about a total of 5 minutes of screen time, he's pretty charismatic. Obviously, he's a killer, but it's a shame he wasn't around longer. I guess they had Angelus to focus on as a villain, no need for what could be a one-off antagonist to stick around any longer. This obviously is the introduction of Oz being a werewolf, which he remains for the duration of his time on the show, but one thing I noticed is how good the costume is. It would have been so easy to CGI the werewolf in, but they went practical and it ages better because of it. They do change the way the werewolf looks after this episode, giving it a more human-like look, but I like the classic werewolf look they do in this episode more. Call it an opinion, I guess. There are an awful lot of odd things in this episode too, though. I mean, reading the Goofs, Bloopers and Continuity Error section of this episode on the wiki is actually longer than any other episode of the show. From little things to having Giles' glasses disappear and reappear over and over on one scene, to having people pushing Giles' car being clearly visible at one point. Despite all of that, it's still a good episode, believe me, and Oz, having only 3 episodes centred around him, is a crime in of itself. But I can handle this one biding our time until we get another. Completely tolerable and enjoyable. It's this season's Xander episode. On Valentine's Day, Cordelia breaks up with Xander, unhappy that her friends keep making fun of her and won't talk to her because she's with him. Xander hatches a plan to make Cordelia fall in love with him so that he can break up with her too, so that she can feel his pain. He gets assistance from Amy the Witch, who was last seen back in the 3rd episode of Season 1. The spell backfires and instead every female, except Cordelia, is under a love spell for Xander. Turns out, it's not that fun, and it builds up until Giles manages to convince Amy to reverse the spell with him, moments before Xander's about to get trampled by the mob of women. I believe this to be one of the funniest episodes of the show, and it's a big favourite among the cast and crew, including Nicholas Brendan himself, who plays Xander. And the funny thing is, it wasn't even supposed to happen. Yes, Sarah Michelle Gellar was hosting Saturday Night Live, so they needed an episode that didn't focus on Buffy, allowing them to turn her into a rat for the second half of the episode. All of her scenes were shot first before she left to do SNL. Like, I just couldn't imagine this episode not being here. It's designed to be filler, but it actually develops Cordelia significantly, as by the end she realises that being with Xander makes her more happy than being with her supposed friends. The only gripe I have is the build-up of Angelus always being extra deadly on Valentine's Day, only for him to send a box of roses with the word soon written on it. So he just decided to skip it this year, yeah? We'll hear from Angelus more significantly in the next episode, however conveniently he's around when Xander and Cordelia hide out at Buffy's house, which actually does result in a great scene with Drusilla, who's determined to turn Xander into a vampire. Not much else to say, it does all it can do, and ends. Shit went from 0 to 100 real quick here. Like, I always thought this one had to be a Joss Whedon episode, but as it turns out, it's Ty King. Yeah, remember the guy who wrote Some Assembly Required? I mentioned he wrote 2 episodes that are completely jarring. Well, this is the second one. Angelus is being creepy and spying on Buffy and the gang, leaving some sketches of them sleeping. Jenny is determined to redeem herself after being exposed as a liar, and after confessing to Giles that she loves him, she visits a local magic shop to purchase an orb, with which she plans to restore Angel's soul. She's discovered the passage that would restore it, but it's written in a lost language, so she plans to use a computer program to translate it, which will take time, obviously. Drusilla gets a feeling of something bad happening, and Angelus is turned onto Jenny's trail. Right as the translation is complete, she exports it to a floppy disk, and Angelus shows up. He destroys the computer, however he doesn't know about the disk, which is still on the desk. He chases down Jenny and snaps her neck, killing her. This is the first major character death of the show, a character who has been developed significantly and dies in a tragic manner. I think this was the point of the show where I knew I was in for a wild ride. Usually major character deaths happen at the end of seasons, but Buffy broke new ground introducing this anyone can die at any time aspect into seasonal television. It's something which later shows like, for example, Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead would base themselves around. It's the surprise aspect, happening when you least expect it to, even if you know it's going to happen. Giles returns home to find Rosie's wine and a message telling him to come upstairs. This beautiful and haunting opera song is playing as he ascends the staircase, like you know exactly how it's going to end. And seeing Giles so happy moments before he finds his dead girlfriend in his bed is very disconcerting, even after I've seen it that many times. And Giles watches through the window as Buffy and Willow are informed and break down. Giles is adamant on getting revenge, and after answering a few questions from the police, he visits the factory when Angelus, Drew and Spike are hiding out, almost getting himself killed. Buffy arrives in the nick of time, figuring out what he was going to do, and saves him. That scene where Giles breaks down and cries with Buffy is just... it is fantastic. This is the father figure, the man we've seen is quite stuck up and dorky, but now he's lost the love of his life. And it's a turning point for this character. He now has this bond with Buffy that will begin to develop a father-daughter relationship between the two, which brings them closer together. There is no happy ending here. Jenny dies, the factory is destroyed, and life goes on. This is the episode which solidifies for me the best villain of the series, which is Angelus. There are, don't get me wrong, great villains in the remainder of the show, but something about just how much Angelus wasn't afraid to kill anyone. No one felt safe. He would taunt them by entering their houses while they were sleeping, and not even touch them. Like he had bigger plans waiting for them. He could kill them at any moment, but he never does. There are a couple of plot holes people bring up, but I think they're all easily explained. First off, there's never a scene where Angel is invited into Giles' house, so how does he get in to leave Jenny there? Well, it's entirely possible this happened off screen. I mean, the ending to Teacher's Pet established that there are fights and things that happen which we don't see. Maybe Angel stopped by one evening. Giles must have been the prime suspect for Jenny's murder, considering she was left at his house, so why didn't the police arrest him, and how does he come back home so quickly to start his revenge plot? Well, there was never any evidence suggesting that Giles could have done it. No DNA on Jenny's body or suspicious activity between the two before. The police would have dismissed him early, and we can assume the murder just went unsolved or was ruled as something else entirely besides it. Jenny's death remains permanent, and it's such a shame to see her go. However, the knock-on effect it has changes Giles' character for the better. It makes him stronger and allows him to be more himself than the Giles we've seen thus far, the Dark Age not included. Originally Oz was meant to be Angelus' first victim, but due to how much potential he had as a character, they left him alive. That to me was the right call. Jenny served her purpose. The ending of the disc, which holds the spell that will restore Angel's soul on it, falls down the side of the desk unnoticed by Willow. It's almost taunting the audience, something we know that the characters don't. A solution that they don't know exists, tantalisingly close to home. It's what Jenny contributed to the overall arc of the story, and I'm fine with that. This was originally planned for Season 1, but for some reason was delayed until late Season 2. It's Rob Des Hotel and Dean Batali's 5th and final episode for the show, and while I mentioned that I've been a fan of pretty much all of their episodes so far, this one is the weakest. It's not bad by any means, but after being told that it was supposed to be Season 1, I can't stop seeing it this way. To be honest, it doesn't really add anything to the overall story. Basically, Buffy has a fever and is checked into the hospital with a flu. There's a demon named Darkindestod who's killing kids, and then a doctor. He's only visible if you have a fever, so Buffy ends up giving herself a fever again once she's healed, and fights the demon. Angelus mulls around doing absolutely nothing. He appears at the start and does nothing, then shows up about halfway through and does nothing. Des Hotel and Batali really had no idea how to write this character. In phases he does pretty much the same thing, but at least he kills someone. In this episode he literally does nothing. Just leave him out! Why is he here? This episode isn't really that funny either. There's a couple of moments where I exhaled out of my nose with humorous intentions, but no outright laughs. It doesn't help that this episode is so out of place in a string of great episodes. I think that giving Buffy a fever and having her sit out for the whole episode and seeing how the gang could solve the problem without her would have been a more interesting angle to take. However, something similar was done 2 episodes earlier in the Xander episode, so I guess they wanted to avoid repetition. There's this flashback story happening where Buffy apparently had a cousin who was killed by Darkindestod years earlier. That serves a purpose, motivation. Surely being the Slayer is enough to want to kill a demon though, right? Also, screaming children isn't a pleasant noise. In fact, I can't stand it. So having a finale where that happens the whole time, it isn't fun. God, it's a shame because I remember thinking this one was alright. And with how impressed I've been with Des Vitale and Vitale's writing before, I was sure I was going to like this one. It's a shame they have to go out on a sour note, but I appreciate the work they contributed. They just couldn't get with the new Buffy style that was coming in, and could only write old Buffy. My favourite episode of the show, mainly for its writing more than anything, Marti Noxon's final contribution to Season 2 of the show. However, we will hear more from her in the following seasons, and it just goes to show how much she's starting to understand these characters. The story is great, the dialogue is great, the cast are all at the top of their acting game. In 1955, a student was having sexual relations with his teacher and they eventually fell in love. When the teacher tried to break it off, however, the student decided it was time to take matters into his own hands, and he shot her. Shocked at what he did, he killed himself a few minutes later. Fast forward 33 years, and now people are starting to reenact the shooting, taken over by the spirit of the student. Giles is convinced that the spirit is Jenny's, however it has nothing to do with how Jenny was killed or anything, and Giles is obviously still struggling with her loss. The gang attempt to tell him that.
I appreciate your thoughts on the matter. I encourage you to always challenge me when you feel it's appropriate. You should never be cowed by authority. Except, of course, in this instance, when I'm clearly right and you were clearly wrong.
They take matters into their own hands and try to exercise it. However, it backfires and summons a swarm of wasps who chase the gang out of the school. While back at Buffy's house, they theorise that what the spirit wants is forgiveness for the act he committed. Buffy is against trying to give the spirit what he wants. She believes that he deserves the torture of reliving his heinous act over and over again, saying that he'll just have to live with it. Xander points out that he can't live with it, he's dead. This causes her to storm out in frustration, and she returns to the school after being called by the spirit. Meanwhile, Angelus shows Spike and Drew to their new home at the Crawford Street mansion, and the factory was burned down 2 episodes earlier, so here they are. Spike has a go at Angelus for not ever attempting to actually kill Buffy, more just playing with her, and after Drew receives a vision of Buffy meeting with death of some kind, Spike convinces Angelus to go after her, which he does. He confronts Buffy at the school and the two begin to act out the shooting again. However, the roles are reversed, and Buffy plays the student, so when she shoots Angelus, it doesn't kill him, and the scene plays out differently, giving it a happy ending. The spirit is finally free, and it leaves Buffy and Angelus mid-kiss, and Angelus is disgusted, fleeing. In the final scene, Angelus insults Spike before leaving with Drew to go hunting. Spike stands up from the wheelchair, revealing that he's pretending and planning to backstab Angelus in the future. Oh, this episode is superb, I love it. A bit more about Buffy's morals are revealed. She doesn't believe in the death penalty, which is quite odd considering she's a Slayer, but when it comes to humans, she has a different view on things as opposed to demons. And we actually start to feel sorry for Spike, who's had his girlfriend in Operation stolen by Angelus. There's a scene where Spike almost looks like he's getting teary-eyed at the two being together. It's a conflicting feeling. This guy was the villain for the first half of the season, and now there's this tinge of sympathy for him. I feel it, others might not. Originally, Spike was supposed to be killed by Angelus halfway through season 2, shifting focus. However, Spike was such a fan favourite beyond cast, crew, fans, that they just had to keep him on the show. Principal Snyder's back. I didn't even notice before that he just disappeared. He last appeared in What's My Line Part 1, which was about 10 episodes prior. After the spirit makes a bunch of snakes appear in the cafeteria and the school is evacuated, the cop appears who Snyder had a shady interaction with back in episode 3, Schoolhard. There's foreshadowing, threats, and Snyder admitting that he's aware the school is on a hellmouth. He knows! He literally knows! There's a theory that I have that I'll discuss more in season 3, but it's entirely possible that Snyder knows Buffy is the Slayer too, and he's playing that off. Willow mentions briefly that she's visited a few Wicca-based websites, hinting at a possible developing interest perhaps. Angelus isn't playing friendly anymore. He intends on killing Buffy from this point forward. All these new revelations are coming to head for this epic 2-part season finale where relationships are tested and trusts are challenged with sadness, loss and hopelessness all sprinkled in between. Actually, before we do that, let's turn the swim team into fish monsters. Why is this episode here? Not necessarily existing, but in this placement specifically. Look, there's nothing wrong with it. But it just feels odd between the previous episode and the 2-part finale. The swim team seems to be getting attacked and killed by a fish demon, but after Xander goes undercover, it's revealed that the swim team's coach is actually feeding them steroids through the steam room, based on some Soviet Union experiments that the coach just managed to come across. The coach ends up getting eaten by the fish demons, formerly the swim team, and they escape into the open ocean. It's the first episode written by David Fury, who would go on to write many episodes of the show, and it was originally planned to take place before Angel lost his soul, which explains why he's only in it for one scene. Speaking of which, some of these early writers really had no idea what to do with Angelus. Ty King got it spot on, and Marti Noxon does okay, but Most of the time, if it's not written by Whedon or Greenwald, Angelus just walks into frame and then out again 2 minutes later. For instance, during the last episode, Angelus decided that he wasn't going to be playing nice anymore and that he was going to try and kill Buffy. So, when Buffy confronts him outside the Bronze, he runs away. Why does he run? Look, I'm glad we're getting to the finale just as this is getting old. I really like Angelus as a villain, but they needed to go more with him here. I mean, I get that this show was still in its early period and had to base itself and its arcs around the episodic format, but for God's sake, Angelus, do something! Willow goes a bit out of her comfort zone when she interrogates Jonathan early on in the episode, who is one of the first suspects. It's not much, but it shows that there is a rougher side to her. We open in Galway, Ireland, 1753, where a young man named Liam is thrown out of his local pub for being too rowdy. As he drunkenly staggers along the street, he spots a strange lady down a dark alleyway, who reveals her name to be Darla. She tricks Liam into being bitten, siring the new vampire, Angelus. Meanwhile in the present, Buffy is unknowingly being watched by Angelus as she fights a few of his mooks. Giles travels to the Sunnydale Museum where the curator has asked him to come in to identify, perhaps translate, a strange rock that's been discovered. Giles figures out that it's actually a tomb of sorts, which can be opened, much to the curator's surprise. Flashback to 1860, where a girl enters the confession booth at her local parish. Giles is on the other side, currently feasting on the priest, and has to take over for the priest during her confession. She confides that she's been having visions of things that haven't happened yet, and Angelus tells her that she's a spawn of Satan, and to continue down that path, as it's what God intended for her to do. This girl turns out to be, of course, Drusilla. Back in the present, Buffy is studying with Willow in Miss Calendar's room, where Willow is currently temping due to her high grades. Buffy drops her pencil and finds a floppy disk that Jenny exported the ensoling spell onto shortly before she was killed. Flashback to 100 years earlier, to 1898, where Angelus is currently approaching a Romani tribe camp. Yes, the same Romani tribe that Angelus killed a member of, and he is indeed ensouled as punishment, so that he may feel unbelievable guilt about his sins for the rest of eternity. We travel back to the present, where the gang is currently torn about what to do with the newfound evidence of Jenny's success. While it would seem like a pretty obvious choice to re-ensoul Angel, Xander makes the very good point that even as Angel, there is always the chance that Angelus could return, making Angel just as dangerous if he were to return and fall for Buffy further. Buffy is insulted, and Xander manages to upset Giles with some comments about Miss Calendar, making them all butt heads at the worst possible time. Buffy storms out and comes across Kendra, who's been told to travel to Sunnydale by her watcher, who senses a dark power rising. Angelus and Drusilla steal the tomb after reading about it in the paper earlier and take it back to the mansion. A confused Spike asks Angelus why he stole the tomb, which is when we find out about Acathla, who was a fierce demon that planned to suck the whole world into hell. Before he could do that, however, a knight stabbed him, turning Acathla to stone. Only someone worthy of wreaking as much havoc can remove the sword, unleashing the end of the world. Kendra, luckily, has bought another sword that has been blessed by the same knight who stabbed Acathla. We'll find out just what that means later. Another flashback occurs, taking us to 1996 New York, just a few short months before the events of the show begin. Angel has been feeling remorse for nearly 100 years, and this is during one of his downtimes as he stumbles through the streets of Manhattan feeding from rats. A demon appears by the name of Whistler, who claims to be a messenger from the powers that be, which is a force who wants to steer the world in the most ideal and best timeline possible. Whistler tells Angel that he plays an important role in something, asking to show him something in order to help change his mind. Angel pulls up in a blacked out car to protect him from the sunlight outside a high school in Los Angeles, where a young Buffy walks out chatting to her friends. She's approached by Merrick, Buffy's original watcher, who informs her of her duties as a slayer, and we see her stake her first vampire in the graveyard later that night. She returns home to her confused and worried parents, who are clearly fast approaching their divorce, as Buffy's dad, despite never being seen in this scene, is heard shouting constantly at both Buffy and Joyce. This is where Angel decides he wants to help Buffy, and shortly after would go on to do so in the first season. However, he's doing the complete opposite in the present, where he attempts to awaken Acathla by performing a ritual, but when he tries to pull the sword out, it doesn't budge. Completely lost, Angelus tells the others that he plans on visiting an old friend to figure out how to complete the ritual. At Sunnydale High, Buffy is taking an exam which gets interrupted by one of Angelus's lackeys, who tells her to meet up with Angelus that night, burning herself in the sunlight. Buffy has learned from episode 1 that leaving her friends alone is a bad idea, so she asks Kendra to stay behind, while Willow attempts the restoration spell. Angelus and Buffy meet at the cemetery, and after a brief fight, Angelus tells her that she's fallen for another trap, and that it's actually for her friends rather than her. She runs off, just as Drusilla arrives at the library with a number of other vampires. Cordelia escapes while Xander, Willow and Giles are knocked unconscious. Kendra's still up and about in the library, but doesn't take her long until she's overwhelmed. Drew hypnotizes the inexperienced Slayer and slits her throat with her sharp nails. Buffy returns to the library too late and finds Kendra dead. She doesn't get much time to mourn, however, as the commotion has attracted the authorities, who believe Buffy is to blame, as does Principal Snyder. She escapes the school, but being the prime suspect, she's now a fugitive. Buffy disguises herself and visits the hospital where she believes the rest of the gang are. She does indeed find Xander there, who shows her the comatose Willow, and the longer she's in a coma for, the less likely her recovery will be. Cordelia returns after realising nobody was actually chasing her, and it soon becomes clear to the gang that Giles isn't there. No, in fact, he's the old friend that Angelus was referring to, and he begins his torture to get the answer to completing the ritual out of Giles. While the police inform Joyce, Buffy heads to Giles' house in search of him, but instead finds Whistler. Being in cahoots with the powers that be, he informs her that he never saw her coming at all. Whistler believed that Angel was supposed to save the world from Acathla, but instead, Angel's the one who raises him. She leaves while Whistler is mid-explanation and comes across Spike? Well, he saves her from a police officer and explains that he actually enjoys the world the way it is, and having it all end isn't exactly his ideal future. Plus, he doesn't really like Angelus since he stole Drusilla from him. In return for her help, he plans to leave Sunnydale with Drew, never to return. Since this is Buffy's only real plan, considering Giles was kidnapped, Willow is unconscious, and Xander's probably concussed. They return to Buffy's home, where in order to explain why the police are after her, she tells Joyce the truth about being the Slayer, who is obviously confused and slightly in denial about it. At the hospital, Willow awakens and Oz shows up, just now being clued in on everything. Joyce and Buffy have a huge argument and Buffy storms out. Joyce tells her that if she leaves, she better not ever plan on coming back. Buffy still leaves for the mansion. Willow plans to try the restoration spell again, and she tells Xander to inform Buffy so that she can stall Angelus until it works. Buffy slips by the library to retrieve the blessed sword, where Principal Snyder lets her know she's expelled. As she heads out, Snyder calls the mayor with the good news. Drusilla uses her psychic powers to appear as Jenny in front of Giles in order to get the answer, which works actually, but in case Giles is lying, they keep him alive. The key is Angelus's blood, not just any random sacrifice like he tried earlier. Buffy returns to Whistler to hear the rest of his explanation, and he tells her that since Angelus's blood awakens Acathla, his blood and sacrifice is what will send Acathla back to hell along with Angelus. It's a race against time, as Buffy has to stop Angelus before he even begins the ritual in order to avoid having to kill him. Xander shows up, and instead of delivering the message that Willow wanted, he just tells her to kick his ass. That's such a monumental moment for the story. Buffy is going in there without any idea that Willow is trying the spell. She's going in there to kill Angelus, and Angel along with that. This should be a huge reveal in the following season that splits the very fabric of the group apart. Unfortunately, it isn't, and just briefly comes up in season 7. Yeah, this moment that effectively sets up the next big chunk of Buffy's character arc and Angel's fate is forgotten about until the final season, where it's a throwaway line. How frustrating. Anyway, Buffy enters and Angelus is hardly intimidated. Spike suddenly stands up and knocks him over the head, getting attacked by Drusilla. Buffy fights with another vampire while Xander enters, helping to rescue Giles before everything goes down. Angelus comes to his senses and completes the ritual, retrieving the sword out of Acathla. As Angelus and Buffy begin their sword fight, Spike knocks out Drusilla and carries her to safety, honouring his agreement with Buffy about leaving.
God, he's gonna kill her.
Angelus does come very close, knocking Buffy's sword out of her reach.
No weapons, no friends, no hope. Take all that away, and what's left?
Me.
That's the shit! Buffy continues her fight with Angelus as Willow all of a sudden can speak perfect Romanian, seemingly being taken over by a spirit of sorts. Just as Buffy is about to kill Angelus, his soul is restored. Yep, Angel's back. Hooray! Except, not hooray, since the sword has already been taken out of Acathla. And as Buffy kisses Angel passionately for the final time, she stabs him in the stomach, sending both Acathla and Angel to hell, saving the world, but at what cost? Buffy returns home secretly to take some belongings, leaving Sunnydale to spend some time alone. Her friends have no idea what happened, and her mother is left to sob at the disappearance of her own daughter. And that's how it ends! No happy ending, even though the dangers have all been expelled, people have died, and the world keeps on spinning. I mentioned in my Season 1 video that we would find out more about the backstory to this universe's story later on, and this is the first instance of what I mean. We see most of Angel's origin and backstory here, being sired by Darla, who he killed in his self-titled episode in Season 1, his ensouling as well as his redemption. It's expanded upon much more in the future, but this is a fine starting point considering that Angel was originally meant to stay dead. I don't think this is much of a spoiler, as I've already brought up the spin-off before, but when the script for this episode was written, Joss Whedon intended on killing off Angel. However, during production he was approached by the network to begin developing a spin-off show around Angel. One thing I can't skip over for being terrible here, and I know everybody's waiting to hear me mention it, the Irish accent. Angel is originally Irish, and David Boreanaz can't, for the life of him, do an Irish accent. It gets marginally better as the flashbacks go on, but it's always pretty abysmal. Even Boreanaz knew it, and at this point it's just seen as funny amongst fans, and no one takes it particularly seriously. Whistler makes his only appearance in this finale. That's right, he never comes back. I have no idea why they created this character, who is crucial to Angel's character arc, and just forget about him after this finale. We never see him again. He does return in the comics as a villain actually, but like I mentioned earlier, they're a bit off the wall crazy with the storylines over there. They could have done more with this character, but they never did. Shame. He's pretty funny actually. Also, Willow goes full witch for the first time, which is actually something we'll be seeing a lot from her as it becomes her forte. Season 2 struggles with adjusting to the full 22 episodes instead of the normal 12, as there's a few episodes that really shouldn't be here. Obviously I still cite this as one of the greatest seasons of the show. It is thrilling, especially for first time viewers. However, I genuinely think that episodes like Go Fish and Bad Eggs were just thrown in here to extend the length of the season. But these characters are constantly developing, and the episodes focusing solely on them are brilliant, like Passion Innocence, What's My Line, and Becoming, have viewers on the edge of their seats. The show does a very impressive 180 to achieve a new tone and make the characters all very distinct with their own charm and merits. Something Buffy always did was write really funny and great villains. Even when they're killing your favourite characters, they're still making you laugh most of the time. Spike and Drusilla take the focus for the first half of the season, and while Spike is a fan favourite, one of my favourite characters too, Drusilla is quite annoying. I mean, she's still quite funny, but I struggle to like and sympathise with her, unlike Spike at times. When Angelus enters the season in episode 15, I'm still all for it. He's supposed to test your feelings towards the character, just like he does to the other characters in the show. Angel gets a lot of criticism from the fan base, a lot of which I feel is unwarranted personally. He's a great character, and he only gets better as he goes on. A lot of people find him boring, but I respectfully disagree. He has a rich backstory, one that's full of inner torture and action that was just begging to be expanded on. I just wish they did more with him here. Angelus. I mentioned earlier that most of the time he just walks into frame and back out some episodes just to remind the audience that he's still there, and I do believe that. On one hand though, it could be seen as building tension. First time viewers won't know if he's going to do something this episode or the next episode, but remember, he's only around for 9 episodes, only really having anything to do for 4 or 5 of those. The episodes where he doesn't do much then feel like they're ushered in, completely out of place at times. On another note, having Buffy go up against Angelus, and just as she's about to kill him, Angel comes back, completely unaware of where he is or what he's done. She feels like she's not only killing the one she loves, but killing an innocent man. Joyce completely freaks out and doesn't really know how to deal with the fact that her daughter's a vampire slayer, just like a regular parent, I would assume anyway. She thinks that Buffy needs psychiatric help, that's genuine worry there about her sanity, and the relationship will have to somewhat rebuild next season as they come to terms with the truth. My favourite episode this season is obviously I Only Have Eyes for You, mainly for its great story and has a genuine use for Angelus on top of that. My least favourite would have to be Killed by Death, which just got on my nerves by the end. However, Reptile Boy isn't far behind. A first time viewer could have written that episode while watching it. It's just too by the books for my liking. As we move into season 3, a couple things to note are the relationships between the characters and where they are. Buffy is lost both physically and emotionally, whereas Xander and Willow know exactly where they are with stable relationships and interests with Cordelia and Oz. Giles is still reeling from Jenny's death, but he moves forward regardless. He doesn't have much to do considering Buffy isn't around, so there might be a tinge of awkwardness and annoyance towards Buffy, while still remaining sympathetic because she did have to kill Angel. As the popularity of the show suddenly skyrocketed, the money and funding behind it did also, so the show will start to visually and audibly get better too. Well, let's find out soon, as next time we're going to jump into season 3 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and see what steps the show takes next to make the characters come back together and the stories more intriguing.